All right, we are live.
Happy Friday.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. What's going on?
Oh, not much, just enjoying the weather. It's hot,
It is hot.
so it's nice.
Yeah,
It's nice.
yeah, it's all good. It's all
Yeah.
good. So let's have fun with today's session.
All right, let's do it.
So as you described it, I geeked out.
You did. You were excited about this video.
I am. So what we're talking about is the Luke Groman
Mm-hmm.
interview on the unwinding of the monetary system.
Yes.
And you're right, I did geek out.
You did geek out.
So
Which you're allowed to. It's totally fine. I'm not judging about, well, I might be judging a little bit about what you geeked out about. But if it's geeking out, then this is something to geek out about. But it's about an hour-long interview, and it was fascinating, but it was over my head in a lot of ways. I do not come from a financial background. I don't come from a history background. Um, and if anyone else feels the same way after watching the video, this is for you because I'm going to make John dumb it down for us.
I wouldn't call it dumb it down, but I do think there's an opportunity here, and I think you're an incredible bridge, for us to say, look, this can be made simpler. So help
Yeah.
us think through it, because
Yeah.
ultimately, Allie, what we're trying to do is
Hmm.
we're trying to get people to map into their SWOT analysis.
Yeah. Uh-huh. To bring it into their daily life. And it's just this topic, like, I mean, even the whole like unwinding and monetary, like unwinding the monetary, like what needs to be unraveled with the monetary. Like yeah, even the title is like, I don't know what's going on here.
Yep. So let me just put a little bit of context in place.
Perfect.
So in the United States, we govern by a system that's called democratic capitalism.
Okay.
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 And if we're in periods of time where consensus building, getting along, people being nice to each other, the system's really working,
Hmm.
democratic capitalism works really well.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
But when you get into a situation where the financial system is really not working very well,
All right.
and there needs to be some pain. There needs to be an allocation of pain.
Okay.
All right. Then what we find is democratic capitalism doesn't work so well.
Gotcha.
Okay. And
Okay.
so we've been going along for years where
Hmm.
the system's been working pretty well.
Yeah.
And again, some people called it China America, where
Yeah.
they said, "Oh, this is great. You got the US and China getting along."
Hmm.
And essentially what would happen is China would ship all kinds of goods and services to us in the United States,
Yeah.
and they were nice enough to take IOUs back. And
Yeah.
the IOUs look like, mortgages. It
Hmm.
looked like buying US treasuries,
Okay.
and it really worked for a long period of time,
Okay.
you
Yeah, they
know?
talk about it didn't matter what they paid for, we got cheap Nikes quick or something like that.
That's
That
exactly right.
that one I understood.
Well, and part of what you're gonna smile about is essentially what we did is we made some choices,
Okay.
okay? But frankly, the government choices that were made advantaged some and
Mhm.
disadvantaged others.
Okay.
Okay. So when you think about, well, who got advantaged?
Mhm.
Well, the fact that the Chinese easily and often bought our treasuries and kept our interest rates really, really low
Yeah.
benefited the financial markets.
Gotcha.
It also took anybody who had stock options or equity ownership in a
Mhm.
company, and
Yeah.
it really rewarded them because what happens is when
Gotcha.
interest rates go down, the
Mhm.
value of bonds and stocks go up. And
Okay.
so what we found is, and just to give you an example, if you were on the compensation committee of a Fortune 500 company and
Okay.
you were allocating stock options and restricted stocks to the executives, the flat out reality is they got too much money.
Yeah.
And the reason is when you're in those committee structures and you're allocating rewards,
All right.
you're just going to smile. You didn't presume that interest rates would go down and the stock market would go through the roof, and those people would be incredibly overpaid.
Yeah.
So I smile a little bit, as I watch the government,
Mm-hmm.
blame rich people for having wealth right now.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at them going, you guys are the ones, along with the Chinese, that drove interest rates down to
Yeah.
zero. So
Mm-hmm.
you created this temporary wealth. And the
Yeah.
reason I'm calling it temporary is if interest rates normalize, Allie,
Yeah.
the stock market's headed down by anywhere from 30 to 50%.
Gotcha.
So all this wealth that we feel like is on the table right now could
Yeah,
get reversed in a hurry.
for sure.
The other thing that we're seeing is when you go in and you look globally, every single country,
Mm-hmm.
China, Japan,
Yep.
Germany, the US, Italy, the European Union, are all deficit spending. By that, I
Okay.
mean, what they're doing is they're spending a heck of a lot more than they're bringing in tax receipts.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
this isn't a little tiny problem, and it's not a new problem. This is a chronic problem that's been going on for over 25 years, and we're reaching the point of no return. Okay. But this
Yeah.
is what happens in democracies. Nobody
Yeah.
wants to be the bad guy, and nobody wants to say, you have to stop. And
Yeah.
so the last time we saw anybody put their foot down in the US financial system, it
Mm-hmm.
was Paul Volcker
Okay.
back in the 1970s and 80s when he drove interest rates up to 16 or 17%.
Gotcha.
Okay. So what we have is it's been one
That's
heck of a party that's been going on for a long time, but
yeah.
there's no doubt we're watching it get late.
Yeah.
We'll say that
Uh-huh.
the clock has hit midnight. Okay. There's a
Yep.
lot of people still at the bar and
Yep.
they're having a heck of a good time. But the reality is that the financial system is showing significant strain and there's going to be some sort of a reset. So
Okay.
when you look at Luke and what he's
Yeah.
saying we're going to have to unwind and replace the existing monetary system. Now,
Gotcha.
he can't tell us exactly when and how it's going to happen, but
Yeah.
he's not the only one saying this. So some of the best minds I know in finance,
Yeah.
you know, are all saying the same thing, and none of them can pinpoint the exact political moment when everybody's going to admit, we can't go any further, but we are
Yeah.
basically long in the tooth and something's going to happen.
Gotcha.
So let me just put a little bit of a background in because when
Okay.
people first start to hear inflation and the dollar as the world reserve currency could change,
Yeah.
those are things that would scare people. And I would
Mm-hmm.
say, I want them to get your attention. I
Yeah.
don't want them to scare you because the
Okay.
reality is you can look back really over the last 500 years and you can examine every superpower
Okay.
and every world reserve currency, and they all ascend and then
Yep.
eventually roll over. So if you
Yeah.
look at Spain, if you look at Portugal, if you
Yep.
look at England, the United States is just another example of a superpower with a world
Yeah.
reserve currency status.
Okay.
And what we know is world reserve currency status typically lasts about 100 years. So
Okay.
when you go back and you look, this particular world reserve currency was created back in 1944.
Okay.
It was after the end of World War II.
Yep.
And at that point in time, you have many of the countries that are at the table totally destroyed by war.
Yeah.
And they had war debts. They had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
destruction that had occurred,
Yep.
and they needed to rebuild. And the
Yeah.
only ones sitting at the poker table with chips right now is the United States. A majority of the gold supply
Yeah.
was owned by the United States. Okay.
Yeah.
So at the time, and there was a lot of discussion
Mhm.
about what should the monetary system look like on a go forward basis.
Okay.
And so the greatest minds in the world at that time, including a guy named John Maynard Keynes, who
Oh,
was
they
a
talk about John Maynard Bank.
well, correct. You just nailed it. So he was an advocate for what they called the bank core.
Yeah.
Okay. And the bank core is spelled BANCOR. And
Okay.
he thought that the power should be vested in global entities, and the primary
Okay.
ones were the World Bank, the
Yeah.
International Monetary Fund, and the Bank of International Settlements. And he was really
Okay.
advocating that all the countries should be at the table.
All right.
Okay. The
Yeah.
votes would not be equal, but each all the countries would be there, and that it would be a global system. And
Okay.
the United States at the time said, "Nope, we're not interested." Essentially, we walked away from World War II as the winner.
Yeah.
And England, as much as we enjoy and admire you, and we have a lot in common, John Maynard Keynes, we're going to respectfully disagree. And you know me, I
Okay.
geeked out, and I have a wonderful book all about the Bretton Woods
Yeah.
negotiation and everything else. But
Yeah.
but eventually, the U.S. forced or imposed its position on everybody
Yeah.
else, and
Mhm.
said the dollar will be the world reserve currency. But the
Gotcha.
concession that we'll make is we'll back it in gold.
Gotcha.
We'll back it in gold.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, if
Yeah.
you said backing currencies in gold, why would anybody do that? So that's called a hard fiat system. So that's a
They
little
mentioned
technical.
that, and I was like, "Fiat, like the car," and then I got distracted. Clearly, my brain is more on that than
That's okay. But Allie, this is a great example of the bridge that you can be, between me and the people who are listening to us, because
Yeah.
fiat just means it's a monetary system, it's a way of exchanging. But
Uh-huh.
the question is, what backs up paper currency? Okay.
Okay.
So if you go back and you study before World War II, almost all the countries attempted to back their currency in gold. So,
Gotcha.
so what they would do is they'd have a large vault in London where
Yeah.
they would have lines drawn for each of the countries. And
Okay.
so if the United States owed Germany money, they would move the gold over into Germany's, you know, space, you
I'm,
know.
like, just picturing, like, Gringotts in my head of, like,
It's
a goblin is moving gold from one country to
You
the
just nailed it. And that's a beautiful way to think about it. And the
other.
other thing that they talked a lot about was, where would you store the gold?
Well, yeah,
Okay.
that would be the whole other question. How do you know that that country's you gotta put it in Switzerland, right?
Well, but you're back to, is Switzerland a safe depository or not?
Yeah.
Even in, World War II, London was perceived as being a safe depository, but at the end of
Yeah.
the day, you had German ships coming in and bombing,
Yeah.
London, and it was like, is that gold stock really safe? And so the
Gotcha.
other thing is, a lot of the gold stock is in New York. Theoretically, some's in Fort Knox. I don't know if there is or not. But even when 9/11 occurred, one of the big concerns that they had is much of the gold inventory was underneath the building attacked in 9/11. So
Oh,
yeah, so that's a big deal. So Ali, at the end of the day,
is that confirmed?
yeah, yeah, well, yeah, yeah. I mean, again, I think whoever took
Oh,
that shot knew what they were doing. But but Ali, just to give a little bit of history, and again, just to geek out again,
yeah.
when you walk in my office,
Mhm.
there's a frame, and there's a letter from the United States saying, under executive order of the president, on or before May 1st, 1933, you have to turn your gold into the US government.
Yeah.
And you're like, seriously? And so a great example of the redesign of the US system during that period of time, they collected the gold in, and they only gave you $20 an ounce. But within just a few months, they reestablished the gold standard at
Gotcha.
35 bucks an ounce. And it
Yeah.
was a great example of a revaluation of the currency.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, so
Huh.
roll forward to Bretton Woods Treaty. The
Okay.
United States says, I promise, I swear, I swear on my heart that I will back our currency in gold.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly enough, when you go
Yeah.
to the 1960s
Yep.
between Johnson's Great Society, where
Mhm.
we had huge deficit spending in our country,
Okay.
and the war in Vietnam,
Yep.
and the dollar being the world reserve currency, we were running what they call twin deficits, trade
Okay.
deficits and budget deficits. And
Okay.
so, very alertly, the French came in and said, "Oh, we want to turn all these dollars into you, United States, and we want gold back." Well, they
Oh,
were really shrewd because they knew we could not honor that commitment. It made no sense for us to give them dollars at a valuation of gold at $35 an ounce
yeah.
because we had printed a lot of money. So
Yeah.
it turned out that gold was artificially suppressed and the French were
Okay.
actually being quite savvy. And
Gotcha.
so what Richard Nixon did at the time is he shut the gold window and said, uh-uh, you know what? We're going to shut the gold window temporarily and we'll let you know when it's back open.
It's
Well, it's
still temporarily closed, right?
yeah, that's exactly right. And so at that time, Allie,
Yeah.
what we did is we basically said, just use dollars. It won't be backed in gold. And then this
Okay.
is where Volcker was actually brilliant. What he did is he caused our interest rates to go way up, and
Uh-huh.
all the currencies converted into dollars and came towards the United States because we were paying such a high interest rate.
Gotcha.
Okay. So that's how
Okay.
they kept the dollar as the world reserve currency.
Wait, so how where did Paul Volcker come
Volcker,
from? Was he like a
he was a career, central banker,
okay.
and he came up through the ranks, and he just was a very big, powerful
Was he in
personality.
office? Like in an
Oh,
office?
yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, for
Gotcha.
sure. For sure. And so I think it was during Ronald Reagan's period of time. Not sure what his role was during Carter
Okay.
administration, but basically he went in and imposed these high interest rates on the system. Okay.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
Allie, there were a lot of businesses severely hurt during that period of time.
Oh, I believe that.
And
Yeah.
then the other thing that happened was it was a period where there was a lot of inflation.
Okay.
And so many wealthy families, including here in Cincinnati,
Yeah.
who were involved in real estate, who were involved in businesses like Cincinnati Millicron. Many of the fates of those businesses changed as the dollar soared and interest rates were so high. So
Huh.
these are game changing periods of time when
Yeah.
they occur.
Yeah.
But the messaging that we're trying to give right now is we've gone for a long period of time since 1972 on what they call a soft fiat currency, which means a currency with no real backing. And in
Okay.
fact, the European Union created the euro, in the
Yeah.
late 1990s. And at the same time, when you go in and look, China has entered the scene and they basically do a lot of trade. And
Okay.
many people are looking at the dollar saying, this isn't going to work long term.
Huh.
So more recently, what we've heard from people is 15-year life left. Well, that wouldn't seem that threatening to me. But
Yeah.
when I listen to the people that are saying we have 15-year life left, most of them know that they're treading on ice. And
Yeah.
they also know if they said something other than 15 years, they could really cause a market event. So we're already seeing Bitcoin take off. We're beginning to see gold and silver prices take off. These
Yeah.
are all symptoms that something's going on a
Gotcha.
deeper underlying. And on a
Interesting.
local basis, yeah, and you get this with housing. We're
Yeah.
watching lumber prices go up, copper prices go up, and steel prices go up. These are all signals that we're going into a new phase.
Yep.
So what I would say to you is, in all likelihood, we're going to see a change come. I'm not
Mhm.
any smarter than any of these other really smart people. We just know it's going to take a little bit of time. But there's something called game theory. And game theory
Yeah.
says a game will continue. And you know
Mhm.
this. Just
Yeah.
take a board game. It
Yep.
or a card game. It'll continue until one of the people says, I'm out, I'm done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So for a while, we thought, okay, you could have several different players show up. You could have,
Okay.
you know, uh, the central banks all get together and decide International Monetary Fund, World Bank, Bank of International Settlements are important, and we're going to go
Okay.
to a centralized global system. And interestingly enough, recently Janet Yellen actually took steps to give a credit facility from
Oh,
the United States to the World Bank and Ali, they were creating what they call strategic drawing rights, which is just a way of
okay.
calling it a world currency.
Okay.
And then at the same time,
Great.
we're watching Russia. Russia at this point is doing almost all the oil sales in exchange for either gold or yuan, which is the Chinese currency. So they're
Okay.
at this point refusing to take US dollars.
Got you.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then on the other hand, you have China, who was happily buying our treasuries up until about 4 or 5 years ago. And
Yeah.
now they are not buying additional treasuries.
Yeah.
And there's also rumors that at some point, China would like to back their currency in gold.
Got you.
Okay. And so they would perhaps deposit the gold in London or someplace like that that's considered a neutral place, but
Yeah.
they could back their currency in gold. And then
Got
you also have this Bitcoin thing going on,
Well,
you
yeah.
know? Yep, yep. And then that's a wild card because don't quite understand how energy gets converted into Bitcoin. You
Yeah.
know, you're looking at it going, how's the government going to tax that? Is it going to
Yeah.
be taxed like it's a capital asset? But on the other hand, we've seen some of the bigger insurance companies in the United States go into Bitcoin,
Yeah.
which starts to give it credibility.
Yeah.
So Ali, even when you look at China and Russia today,
Yeah.
some of the longer term contracts are actually being underwritten in yuan,
Okay.
so this is
Yeah.
all very, very different, you
Yeah.
know. And then what I would say to you is when you see this going on, when you see trade deficits, budget deficits, when you
Mhm.
see problems with inflation, when you see wealth inequality, these are all things that show up at the end of a system.
Got you.
Okay.
Makes
So the
sense?
question is, which direction will this go?
Yeah.
And who are the winners and losers? So, last comment,
Yeah.
a book just to geek out again that I enjoyed a lot called The Bankers That Broke the World talks about
That broke.
after World War One, before World War Two, during the 1930s,
Yeah.
Germany, France, Britain, and the US central bankers were all getting together. And perhaps we could put this in the link.
Yeah.
And they talked about what are we going to do next because the global economy is
Yeah.
struggling. And
Yep.
then it was really fascinating. Germany and France decided to inflate, print money.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so what happened in those countries is if you borrowed money and owned real estate, or if
Yeah.
you owned farmland or you sold food crops, you did
Okay.
extremely well. Okay.
Okay.
On the other hand, if you were somebody that was on a pension or had whole life insurance, okay,
Okay. Yeah.
or just had cash in a savings account,
Yeah.
you were creamed. You were
Gotcha.
creamed because the inflation took away the purchasing power of those assets.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, when you looked at the United States and
Yeah.
Britain during the period of time, we did deflation.
Yeah.
So when you look at England, England was the depository for many people's banking relationships. And so they decided to stay on the gold standard. The value of the pound went through the roof during that period of
Ah.
time. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, $100,000 in pounds was worth
Yeah.
$130,000 in purchasing power because of deflation. So the way
Wow.
that's said is if you had $100,000, it would buy $30,000 more of
Yeah.
real estate,
Crazy.
commodities, things like that. Yeah. And the United States went in that direction too, Alec,
Yeah.
because we at that time were very interested in becoming a world reserve currency and
Gotcha.
increasing the credibility of the United States during that period of time.
Yeah.
So bottom line, what you're hearing us say is, look, somewhere on the horizon,
Yep.
a
Yeah.
change is coming. You know, the
Yep.
other thing that was mentioned in this article, and I thought was really interesting, um, we're seeing an awful lot of issues, social issues today around overdoses on opioids.
Mhm.
A lot of alcoholism has showed up,
Yep.
especially around COVID, and we're seeing way too many suicides. And these are all societal problems that kind of show up.
Yep.
You know, the other thing that we're seeing, when you look at the unrest in the streets,
Yeah.
especially from middle class voters, it's also a symptom that there's a lot of pain.
Yeah.
So again, these are all telltale signals to us in the financial world that look, some bigger change is coming.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now,
Cool.
the hard thing for the US on this, Allie,
Yeah.
France used to always wave their finger at us and say, this is an unfair advantage that the United States has because the
Okay.
US can print money anytime that it wants.
Gotcha.
And we can basically have other people subsidize our standard of living.
Hmm.
In all likelihood, we're going to get to the end of that period of time. And
Yeah.
so if you said, John, what would it look like? You could see the dollar's value go down versus
Okay.
other currencies. Now,
Yep.
lots of people say to me, you're wrong, John. Everybody's doing the same thing. But ultimately, I do think you'll watch the dollar go down. If the dollar doesn't go down, I actually think you're going to see something called capital controls,
Okay.
where they say you can't take more than this amount of money invested overseas.
Got you. Okay.
And then the other thing that we're going to see is, and we know this is coming, to soften the blow of an inflation, they'll do something called financial repression. So let's just
Okay.
talk about that. In
Yep.
financial repression, Allie, think of the number of people that still might want to buy a new house
Okay.
or do construction on their home. If
Yeah.
tomorrow we had inflation and interest rates went to 6 or 7%, that would really hit
Yeah.
the housing market, and frankly, it would also hit the stock market very,
For
very hard.
sure.
So
Yeah.
the workaround is they do something called financial repression, big
Okay.
word, but all it means is this hand, they're causing inflation to go up, and
Yep.
then they're holding interest rates down with this hand.
Yep.
But the question is, how long can they do it? So, great example again.
Yeah.
Sorry to pull old examples, but in the 1970s, there
Yeah.
was something called Regulation Q that
Okay.
prevented savings and loans, I think maybe banks too, from paying more than a certain interest rate. There was an interest rate
Huh.
ceiling during that period of time. And
Interesting.
so, interestingly enough, Wall Street, being the way it is, came up with something called a money market fund.
Oh.
Okay. And so incredible amounts of deposits left the banking system and
Okay.
basically went into money market funds during that period of time. And so it was very, very disruptive to the banking system. So that just gives you an example of the
Gotcha.
kinds of underlying changes that can
Yeah.
occur during a period like this. So, last comment, the other thing that
Okay.
you'll watch the government do is start to really take over the economy. So instead of having a
Okay.
global market based economy, we're probably going to have a lot more hands on involvement by the government, a lot more spending programs. So, as much as we're all kind of balking at the amount of money that Mr. Biden's proposing be spent,
Mm-hmm.
I do think we're going to be in a situation where, like it or not, I think some of those programs are coming through the door.
Gotcha.
And as a fiscal conservative, which I consider myself, and as a fiscal conservative, I get mad at both political parties all the
Yeah.
time.
You do.
I'm not
You
happy with
do.
either of them.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm for people saving and being treated fairly for saving their money.
Yeah.
And I hate to see people that are good people doing the right things punished for good behaviors.
Yeah.
But we're just going to have to wait and see how this all plays out.
Nice.
So anyway, that's why I posted it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we're looking for people to think about, well, what does this mean for, you know, my particular industry? What does this mean for my company? What does
Yes.
this mean for, my compensation with my company? because the reality is,
Mhm.
if you're a financial analyst or controller working for any of these companies,
Yeah.
it is extraordinarily difficult, Allie, to run rates of return,
Okay.
to forecast cash flow, to forecast tax rates. So at some point, if you're in those jobs, you're like, for
Yeah.
God's sake, just get on with it. Because you're disrupting the economy and the decision making so much by
Yeah,
waiting. We'd rather see you make some choices and get on with it. You know, but I
man.
think the advice we would give most people today is start thinking about it, make
Yep.
sure that you've got your balance sheet where you want it, do
Yep.
your tax planning, and start to think about as inflation comes in, what would I do differently?
Perfect. I think
Okay.
that's great.
Okay. Any other
Super
questions that I
helpful.
can help with today?
No, I think you did a good job. You summarized it. You made it easier for me to understand. And yeah, feel good.
Okay. Well, we're always here to take questions
Yep.
and, help people in any way that we can. Uh, that's what Untap's all about,
Yeah.
generous spirit. And at the same time, you and I are going to talk about some real interesting and fun stuff coming down the road where we're going to
Oh,
talk
yes.
about entitlement and gratitude.
It's
So we'll move
coming
off
up.
some of this financial stuff, and move into some softer areas that'll be a little more fun and interesting for people.
Exactly. No, I'm just kidding.
You're ready. I know you're ready.
All right. All right. Well, it was good. You have a great weekend, John.
All right. Thanks a lot, Allie. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye bye.